Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Kris. This is part 3, Rise and Fall of... I already forgot how to say the name. I did another video, took a 20-minute video, turned it into a 50-minute video, so it's not been a... I was talking a lot, I apologize. Anyways, this is the third... Oh, I gotta get some water. You know, this is a blue cup and a blue shirt, but for some reason it becomes purple. I don't know. I had to get some ice water in me. All right. So before we get started, if you can click and then clack that and then clickety clack that, that'd be awesome. Definitely. Please, definitely. Optional. That's all I ask. All right. Let's get back into it.
No further large-scale wars between the Khazars and Caliphs would occur during the reign of the Abbasid Caliphs, whose revolution toppled the Umayyads shortly after. However, the peace forged between the Caliphate and Khazar Khaganate would not bring either empire any lasting security, and they would soon find themselves facing shared new threats, sometimes necessitating unlikely alliances even as their old rivalry simmered. Initially, the Scandinavian rulers of the early Rus had been important trading partners for the commerce-focused Khazar Khaganate, which throughout most of the 9th century had held Kiev as a regional capital, from which tributes were extracted from East Slavic nations. Though the antagonistic Volga Bulgars lay between the Rus and the flourishing Khazar capital of Ityl, Rus traders would take a circuitous route down the Dnieper into the Black Sea, making stops to trade in Cherson in the Crimean Peninsula before continuing up the Don River to Ityl. However, towards the end of the 9th century, a number of factors began to disrupt this arrangement. With the Caliphate no longer providing a clear shared enemy, the long-standing uneasy alliance between the Khazars and Byzantium began to break down, and the Byzantines began seeking other alliances in the steppes to weaken the Khazars, and keep any single polity from growing to be a potential threat. In the 880s, the Alans and other groups backed by the Byzantines would chip away at Khazar power, simultaneous with renewed attacks by the Pechenegs, a nomadic people the Khazars had bloodied and driven westwards but never truly subjugated. Despite the Rus having made a devastating raid on Constantinople only a few short decades ago in 860, they would prove an ideal partner and proxy for the Byzantines. Through diplomacy and monetary support, the Eastern Roman Empire began to supplant Khazar influence in the Rus lands with Greek, with the same Greek historian who detailed the savage Varangian assault on Constantinople in 860 remarking favourably on the rapid adoption of Christianity in their lands by 867. Though the Khazars weathered most of these attacks, this period would see them lose the city of Kiev and lordship over most of the Eastern Slavs to the Varangian leaders Rurik and Oleg, marking the foundation of the Kievan Rus, an occasion that would have a momentous impact on centuries of history to follow. Following the takeover of Kiev and its establishment as a new capital, Slavic vassals of the Scandinavian Rus would engage in shipbuilding as a form of tribute, delivering to their overlords in Kiev the vessels that would bring both their merchants to Ityl and their raiders to Constantinople and the Caspian, with the great river fleets of the Rus boasting more than 2,000 ships by the accounts of Byzantine chronicles. Meanwhile, on the Khazars' southern border, the slow splintering of the Caliphate and the emergence of newly independent Muslim principalities made their uneasy truce with the Caliph in Baghdad less of a guarantee for peace in the region. And 912 would see a 10,000-strong Muslim army from the newly independent region of Shirvan defeated near today's Akusha by Khazar forces in a failed invasion attempt. The first stirring of conflict that would involve the Rus with both the Khazars and Caliphate occurred the following year in 913, when a great fleet of Rus ships portaged into the Volga River. Promising half their plunder to the Khazar Khagan, they were granted safe passage into the Caspian Sea, possibly an act of retribution by the Khazar Khagan for Ibn al-Haytham's recent provocation, and set to ravage and plunder the wealthy Tabaristan and Shirvan regions, with primary sources describing a fleet of 500 ships, each manned by 100 people. Though these numbers were almost certainly inflated, this nevertheless represents an enormous incursion that the merchants and fishermen of the region were quite unprepared for. After numerous landings to capture plunder and slaves along the southern Caspian coast, An attempt at resistance was undertaken by Ali ibn al-Haytham as the fleet approached his capital of Baku. While the Rus had anchored at a small chain of islands close to Baku's shore, Ibn al-Haytham mobilized his forces along with thousands of enraged local volunteers, pressing whatever small fishing boats and merchant ships they could lay their hands on into service to ferry the ragtag Muslim army across the water. However, despite their numbers, they were out of their element on the water, and their makeshift navy was hopelessly outclassed by the superior ships of the Rus. Though some of the boats made it to landfall on the islands, they made little ground against the Rus, who killed many in close quarters fighting on the beach, and once the ships of the Rus took to the water, retreat became an impossibility. The disorganized attack soon unraveled, with simultaneous fighting on the islands and boarding attacks between ships on the Caspian, ending with the Shavani force broken and thousands dead, slain by Kievan warriors, or drowning as overloaded civilian craft overturned, or outmatched soldiers threw themselves into the water to escape the merciless boarding parties. Baku would be plundered, with this second defeat and humiliation for Ibn al-Haytham playing a role in his overthrow and the end of his dynasty a few years later. News of the attacks spread quickly, sparking outrage not just in the Caliphate but among the large Muslim populations of the Khazar Khaganate, who petitioned their ruler for permission to attack the returning Rus as they made their way back home through the Volga, and avenge the killings in Persia. By this point, the military strength of the Khaganate no longer stemmed entirely from the nomadic Khazar horsemen that had founded it, and with Muslim mercenaries of Khorasani origin providing much of its strength, and even providing the Khagan's royal guard, the Khagan chose to break his deal to the Rus and acquiesce in the name of stability. Thus, an army of 15,000, formed of both Muslims and some of Itil's Christians, blocked the raiders' return journey near Itil, with the Rus landing their vessels and drawing up battle lines.
Sorry, I'm chewing on ice. Did it say Muslims and Christians got together?
15,000, formed of both Muslims and some of Itil's Christians.
All right. Well, that's what I heard.
Blocked the raiders' return journey near Itil, with the Rus landing their vessels and drawing up battle lines. While the Rus were skilled warriors and already battle-tested after their victories on the Caspian, the Khazar Muslims had a significant cavalry force, an advantage neither the Rus nor the vanquished defenders of Baku had boasted. The fighting raged for 3 days, with no quarter given, leading to the routing and massacre of the Rus raiding force, with whatever remnants of the broken army who escaped the battle proving easy pickings for other nomadic peoples between Itil and Kiev before they could reach the safety of home. Despite this disaster, the strength of the Rus was far from broken. This breakdown in relations closed the rivers to the Rus in the following years, but also denied the Khazars much of the profitable trade the Rus had brought to their markets, with the Volga Bulgars eclipsing them as the Varangians' main trading partner. In addition, a brief war between the Rus and Khazars soon saw even more Khazar tributaries absorbed into the Kievan fold. The most complete single source detailing the political and cultural situations of the steppes and the Rus comes from the travels of Ahmad ibn Fadlan in 921, a Muslim traveller and Islamic legal scholar dispatched to the court of Volga Bulgaria by the Caliphate to provide guidance after their recent conversion to Islam. In exchange for their conversion, the Caliphate agreed to fund the construction of a fortress, a deal in which the Bulgars intended to wrest more independence from their overlords, and the Caliphate hoped to get a powerful Muslim ally and weaken their old northern rival. Ibn Fadlan's account still shows the Khazars as the region's dominant power. It describes at length the richness and splendour of the Khazar capital of Itil and the many palaces of the Khagan and his harem, but definite cracks begin to show. Beginning his travels by departing Samanid-ruled Khorasan with a massive trade caravan of 5,000 people, Ibn Fadlan first travelled through the lands of the Oghuz Turks. In one encounter that demonstrates the fragile nature of Khazar power in the region, an Oghuz tribe, believing Ibn Fadlan's gifts were meant for their nominal overlord, the Khagan, held Ibn Fadlan and his caravan hostage for several days. Lively debates ensued among the tribe as various leaders argued on whether to have the travellers either killed and robbed, sent back home naked as a warning, or traded for Oghuz hostages held by the Khagan in Itil. When finally convinced the Muslim caravan was on a mission to undermine the Khazars rather than seek an alliance with them, the Turks let it proceed peacefully on its way, foreshadowing
Sorry about that. Text message.
the outright Oghuz aggression that would help herald the Khaganate's end in a few decades. While the period of dissolution and decline the Caliphate similarly faced meant no further invasions across the Caucasus would be coming, the Caliphate's diplomatic mission and funding to the Volga Bulgars would play a major role in the Khazars' downfall. Ibn Fadlan was disdainful of the Bulgars' practices during his visit, with the rather xenophobic traveller complaining at length about every slip or slight in the new converts' religious practices and of their comparatively open sexual practices and gender roles compared to his native Baghdad. However, he was successful in his mission to bring the Volga Bulgars solidly into the Muslim fold, while the Arab-funded fortress diminished the authority the Khazar Khagan could exert over his Bulgar vassals.
Excuse me. So he brought them from Jewish back into the Muslim fold? Because they did still have that agreement, but I don't know how long that agreement lasted.
In the following year, Muslim merchants would favour the trade routes into the lands of their Bulgar co-religionists, which, combined with these...
Oh, sorry. The Bulgars. Sorry, I got sidetracked thinking of these guys. Never mind.
simultaneous disruptions of trade by the Oghuz to the east and the Rus to the west, and the loss of tribute from so many Slavic tribes now under Kiev's overlordship, caused Itil's vital trade revenues to plummet drastically and reduced the state's ability to field and equip its armies. Simultaneously, the reign of Romanos Lekopenos in Constantinople and his aggressive persecution of Jews in Byzantium marked the final breakdown of the Byzantine-Khazar alliance, with direct clashes between Khazar and Byzantine forces occurring in Crimea during the 920s, and further Byzantine outreach to the Pechenegs and Rus following. The 940s would bring this odd, tense Cold War to a head on multiple fronts. After occasional smaller-scale conflicts over the previous years, 941 saw a large-scale attack by the Rus on the Khazars aimed at overthrowing their suzerainty. It proved a failure, with a Khazar general named Pesek driving them back, but it would be a short reprieve for the increasingly embattled Khazar state. The brief victory against the Rus was followed by renewed Pecheneg, Oghuz and Alan attacks, ostensibly funded and spurred on by Byzantium. While this accusation stems from an anonymous letter and cannot be fully verified, it is lent credibility by passages in Emperor Constantine VII's book on imperial administration that advises future emperors to make war on the Khazars via Alan and Oghuz proxies. The Caliphate, meanwhile, was crumbling in its own right. In the 930s, a Zoroastrian ruler by the name of Mardajiv had briefly seized control of Tabaristan and northern Persia, putting Baghdad and the Caliph himself under threat. While Mardajiv would be assassinated in 935, the power vacuum would be filled not by a resurgent caliphate, but by the Shia Muslim Buyid dynasty, which rapidly expanded from Fars to eclipse the Caliph in Baghdad as the dominant Muslim power, reducing the Caliph to a vassal in 945, while independent Muslim rulers in what is modern Azerbaijan continued to clash with the Khazars. However, the figure whose name would loom largest during the fall of the Khazars would be the warlike Kievan ruler Sviatoslav. In the same year as the Caliph's subjugation to the Buyids, Saint Olga was taking the throne in Kiev as regent to her young son Sviatoslav, following her husband Igor's murder. Olga's time as acting ruler of Kiev would be as blood-soaked as her son's coming reign of conquest, with revenge at the front of her mind. Igor had beaten the East Slavic Drevlian people in battle, only to die at Drevlian hands while recklessly travelling to their lands under light guard to demand increased tribute. The Drevlians attempted to push what they saw as an advantage over the Kievan Rus, now ruled by a child and a woman, demanding tribute and Olga's hand in marriage. Demands Olga would answer in a poetically brutal manner. While feigning fealty and surrender, she buried one group of Drevlian diplomats alive, lured a party of their nobility into a bathhouse she would bar the doors of and set ablaze, and slaughtered Drevlian warriors in their hundreds after letting them grow drunk on mead at a feast in her dead husband's honour. Her vendetta ended with the Drevlian capital of Iskorosten burned to ashes, its people killed or enslaved, and the Drevlian tribal confederation broken up and assimilated into the Kievan Rus, its name all but dropping from the annals of history.
So she wasn't somebody who apparently had much of a grudge. Yeah. People who want power will do anything to keep power. And I'm not saying... No, I'm saying she's crazy. But that's what I like. No, I'm kidding.
This campaign would only be a taste of what her son Sviatoslav had in store for Europe and the steppes, however. One of the most famous accounts of the Khazars, and one of the very few surviving documents of Khazar origin, dates from this period. This document is a correspondence between the Khazar ruler Joseph ben Aron and Hasdai ibn Shaprut, an accomplished Jewish scholar and doctor who served as an important minister to the Umayyad Caliph of Cordoba. Dating to the late 950s or 960, Joseph's reply to Hasdai provides a valuable account of the conversion of the Khazar nobility to Judaism, but its account of the contemporary political situation is questionable, describing only a history of unbroken Khazar victories and claiming continued mastery over the peoples of the steppes, less than a decade before his kingdom's final collapse. After the end of his regency in 962, Sviatoslav would soon provide the final hammer blow, reaching out to the Oghuz for an alliance to crush the Khazars in a vice between them. Sakel, a Khazar fortress that had long held the Rus at bay, fell in 965, and the Khazar state began to swiftly crumble in a two-front war. Previously, superior Khazar cavalry had given them the edge against the Rus, an advantage lessened by the presence of Oghuz and Pecheneg mercenaries accompanying Sviatoslav's army, providing him with skilled nomadic horsemen to match his foes. Though the conquest would take 4 years, Khazar central authority seems to have broken down quickly, with the Khagans' inability to keep the encroaching Oghuz at bay in the east, sparing most of the settled subjects of Khazaria to petition the Samanids for aid instead, and most of the people of Khazaria soon adopted Islam in exchange for Persian intervention to keep the Turks at bay. In the west, there was no ally or patron to appeal to, as many of the Khazars' remaining vassals and tributaries had already been convinced by Sviatoslav to join the Rus without resistance prior to his invasion. Itil's fall in 969 marked the end of the Khazar Khaganate, and while the Pechenegs and Volga Bulgars would remain powerful contenders in its former territory, the Kievan Rus had positioned themselves as the clearly dominant successor to their once mighty empire. The centuries of Khazar rule had helped shape Europe's history in numerous ways. It was in part their influence that shaped the emergence of the earliest principalities to use the name Rus, and their violent rise to power in the steppes that spurred Bulgar and Magyar migration into what would become Bulgaria and Hungary. The Khazars' downfall would have similar reverberations. Of the victorious allies, the Kievan Rus would expand rapidly into former Khazar territory and westwards against the First Bulgarian Empire, joining the Oghuz again in 985 for a joint attack on the Volga Bulgars, before soon turning on and subjugating those Oghuz tribes that remained in the formerly Khazar steppes as their relentless push east continued. Though another mighty nomadic nation, the Mongols, would bring an end to the Kievan Empire Sviatoslav had ruled, from this foundation, Muscovy and later Russia would grow to span Eurasia as one of the world's largest empires. The Oghuz, meanwhile, would splinter with the threat of the Khazars gone, but one of these offshoots, the Seljuks, would soon forge an empire spanning Persia. More videos on Islamic and nomadic histories are on the way. To make sure you don't miss that,
So the third video just kind of turned into this fast-paced, like 150 years or whatever it seemed like. All right. Well, that was good. I liked it. The third part, I didn't like as much, only because it was more, it didn't focus on it. Like, it covered a much longer period. And so it, you know what I'm trying to say. It didn't seem to have as much detail as it did the first parts. But anyways, we're going to end it here. Appreciate it. Like I say, this was a request. So if you have any other requests, please let me know. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.